Good morning. Welcome to our step 3 of the BC Restart Best Practice webinar. I see we're just, many people are coming into the webinar. My name is Ingrid Jarrett. I'm President and CEO of the BC Hotel Association. And I'm joined today with Arun from go2HR, and he's a great partner along with Krista and her team. And we've been working today responding to all the questions and phone calls and emails that we've been getting from an operational perspective for the restart plan for step 3. So Chris, can you confirm that everybody that is in the waiting room has already, that they're already in the webinar? Great, thank you so much. So a few housekeeping details for this morning. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be shared by both Arun on go2HR as well as BCHA and our communique. It will also rest for further viewing on our website. And it really has been developed around the questions that we've received from you as our industry, making sure that we provide the information that you need when it comes to operations and the changing landscape in which we're offering. We'll go through the webinar together. Each of us have some slides to present, and then we have included a series of slides that are some of the questions that you've asked prior to the webinar. And then we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and I will vet those questions, and depending on whether or not it's Arun or myself answering them, we'll do our best to answer your questions. Should there be additional questions, of course, we're always available to support you. So welcome today for the Step 3 BC Restart Best Practice webinar. I'm Ingrid Jarrett. I think you've seen this slide before. I join you today from the unceded territory of the Okanagan Silks people. And these are the lands in which I live, work, and play. And I'm honored to live on these lands.
Thank you, Ingrid, and good morning, everyone. My name is Arun Subramanian. I work with go2HR. I look after the health, safety, and HR portfolios at go2HR. I'm joining you today from the unceded traditional territory of the Kwantlen, Semiahmoo, Katsi, and other Coast Salish peoples on whose lands I work, live, and play. The golf course is probably a place that I spent a lot of my time over the last year. So I have to say that my enthusiasm for the game far exceeds my ability, but I remain hopeful that with perseverance, I'll start playing it as well as Ingrid or Mike here. So moving right along, getting into step 3 has indeed been a much awaited and very welcome news for the hospitality business. So after more than a year of restrictions, businesses can finally begin the process of getting back to a semblance of normalcy, if we all know what that means anymore. So this, of course, is based on the very successful vaccination campaign that is rolled out across the province, where over 80% of eligible BC residents now have their first doses, at least, of the vaccinations, and a significant number is continuing to get their second doses as well. So based on that, there's been a significant drop in the cases, as you know, across the province, and especially in former hotspots like the Fraser Valley, where cases have really diminished. So this has allowed the province to move into step 3 of the restart, which has much less restrictions than we were used to in the past. However, after over a year of very restrictive orders, many find the move to almost no orders a little unsettling, almost very sudden. So this picture, I think, very accurately depicts the pace at which different people are accepting these changes. So I would definitely underline this as being a very important consideration for all businesses as they make their transition into step 3. So whether it's for your customers, for your employees, for your contractors, you'll have different people within those groups who are at very different stages in terms of their acceptance of the step 3 restart and the loosening of the restrictions. So this can prove to be a point of confusion, conflict, and in some cases, even violence, as we have unfortunately seen in the past when restrictions came in as well. So employers must plan for it and should be prepared to address it at the first signs of it. So what are some of the changes, especially health and safety related changes for step 3? So I think the primary one, and one that has become so synonymous with our existence almost over the last year, is the COVID-19 safety plan. I mean, I don't think anyone can get this out of our memories for a long time now, but now we realize that it's not in place or not required anymore. So the COVID-19 safety plan was extremely prescriptive, or fairly prescriptive. Now we are moving to a communicable disease prevention approach, which is, to start with, a little hard to say, and it's not very prescriptive. So you're essentially moving from a lot of restrictions to almost no restrictions, just a few recommendations and guidelines. So the thinking behind it is, sorry, Chris, if you could stay in the previous slide, please. So the thinking behind it is a recognition that while numbers are low, COVID-19 hasn't gone away. So a possibility that it may become more prevalent during the fall, or there may be a spike in flu or other communicable diseases. So to have some program in place that can address the risks of either a recurrence of COVID-19 or some other communicable disease. But there is also a recognition that the province would probably not go back to the kind of large scale restrictions as in the past, but be focused more on very targeted or specific ways to deal with any kind of outbreaks. So there's no restriction. There's no need to have a written plan anymore. There's no need to post it on your website. There's no need to have it available in your business. However, it would probably be a good idea for you to actually work through it, in consultation with your employees, and be able to put something together which everyone can refer to. So that may actually help you go about this. But I would also encourage you to use some of the channels that you use to communicate the COVID-19 safety plans, to communicate to your employees and your customers about what exactly you're doing to address some of the risks that may still exist in the environment, and how you're looking out for their health and safety. And moreover, the changes for this can be gradual. There's no drop dead date like there used to be in the past, where restrictions came in at a specific date and all employers had to comply. Today, moving away from these restrictions, if you have not already done so, can be gradual or phased based on what an employer feels is needed for their individual workplace. So that's another important piece for consideration as you make these changes. And as Dr. Henry pointed out, businesses are encouraged or recommended to keep any of these restrictions that they can without hampering their business realities if they can, because a lot of these are also means to prevent communicable diseases like the flu. So, and she has also specifically addressed the larger public to be respectful of some of the changes that the employers still have, or some of the restrictions that the employers still have in place, even though provincial guidelines don't require it. So how do you start? How does an employer approach this communicable diseases prevention program or plan? And I know that both those have been used kind of interchangeably. A great place to start would be the WorkSafe BC 4-step guide, which they've really done a great job in terms of how you should approach communicable disease planning. So we'll look at some of the steps in a little more detail. So the first step is obviously understanding the risk. As with any such plan, understanding what the risk is from a health and safety perspective is where you start. So the risk in this case essentially is the prevalence of COVID-19 in the environment. So this is COVID-19 in the province, in your specific region. These, you typically would know what that is from the provincial health guidelines or the provincial health officer, any kind of directives that they offer, or press conferences or press releases that talk about what the prevalence of this in the environment is. There could also be some very specific regional advisories based on what cases look like in different parts of the province. There could be sector specific guidelines which may deal with issues that are they're beginning to see in specific sectors. There could also be individual guidelines for employers from local health authorities based on any outbreak or situations that occur in your workplace. So monitoring all these is essential. So it is highly recommended that you have somebody on your team who is responsible for doing this, who's responsible for scanning, the news or any other sources of communication. I'm sure the BC Hotel Association and go2HR will continue to provide these updates but you definitely need to assign that role to someone within your organization. Step two is based on the risks that you identify, again, COVID-19 and communicable diseases in this case, is what do you need to do? What measures do you need to put in place? What policies or practices that you need to adopt or adapt to ensure that there is that you address the risk of spread of communicable diseases. So an example of this may be a sick leave policy, to ensure that your people don't come into work when they are sick. So do you have a sick leave policy in place? Do employees know what they're entitled to if they're sick? Do they know what to do if they find themselves having symptoms when they're at work? All these need to be clarified in advance, and you may have already done some of this as part of your COVID-19 safety plan. So it's only a question of adapting some of those for the current scenario. One other change has been the daily health check. So the daily health check is not required anymore, but it's still essential that you monitor your employees to ensure that they're healthy when they're in the workplace. So putting some other mechanism in place, including maybe something as simple as a reminder or an email reminder that goes out at regular intervals, or an agenda item in your staff meetings or in your daily briefings would help ensure that you're able to monitor if your employees are well. Another piece that needs to, you need to continue focus on is the hand hygiene piece. So anything around hand washing, having adequate supplies in the washrooms, making sure there are sanitizers provided, which I'm sure you all already been doing. So to continue with some of those practices and making sure that coughing etiquette, etc., is observed in the workplace, maybe posters talking about it. Those are important as well. Another piece of a practice or a measure that you need to put in place is to ensure your cleaning, regular cleaning, which has seen a fair level of enhancement during the COVID-19 pandemic in the last stages of it. That enhanced cleaning requirement is not there anymore, but effective cleaning that you had prior to that should probably continue the way it did, or maybe a little accelerated as well. But what is more important again is to make sure that it is happening. You have clear schedules for it. There are checklists, or the implementation of that is monitored. And again, somebody is responsible for actually doing it. And finally, in terms of measures, ventilation is coming out as another big piece. So ensuring there is adequate ventilation in the workplace has come out as a measure that they have highly recommended in the workplace. Again, this could be as simple as keeping windows open in your workplace. It doesn't mean that you need to go out and change your HVAC systems necessarily. But if you do have HVAC systems, then are they having regular preventive maintenance? Is there regular servicing being done? Are there filter changes being done? Anything related to actually maintaining that ventilation system in a way that it is effective to provide good ventilation in the workplace. And in fact, the website itself, where the template exists for the guide, there is a one pager on ventilation that's pretty informative. Finally, any other additional directives that may come from a health officer who visits your premises, or just a general directive in your region or your industry, any additional measures that you may need to put in place related to that. The third piece is around communication, and I think the industry has done a really great job on keeping employers, keeping customers and employees, appraised of the things that you're doing. I think those kinds of efforts should continue. It's important to showcase the hard work that you're putting in to ensure that your customers are safe and your employees are safe. So to make sure that that level of communication continues is, I think, highly recommended. And finally, monitoring the workplace is critical. As I mentioned earlier, to make sure that people are not sick, make sure that the provisions that you're put in place are working, to make sure that the the practices or guidelines that you have for your workplace are being implemented. And if there is a challenge in terms of implementing, that there is someone available to answer employees' questions, to be able to answer customer questions, so that it doesn't lead to any kind of conflict scenarios. So broadly speaking, these are the 4 steps. They are not, as I said, very prescriptive. The template that they've attached, WorkSafe BC, is fairly effective. It's fairly simple to use. But we are also happy to help with any kind of questions that you may have about this. And we used to have a COVID-19 review service, which I know a lot of you have actually utilized. If there are questions, we have kind of adapted that for the communicable diseases program. I'll share the link in the chat late during this webinar. Please feel free to reach out. And also for the Be Safe training program, which again, I must acknowledge that the hotel employer group was the largest set of cohort in the Be Safe program. So we're really glad that you've embraced that. We continue to make changes to reflect it, and we'll keep you apprised of it. So I think that concludes a broad overview, and I'll hand this back to Ingrid to pick the
Thank
rest of it
you.
up.
Thank you, Arun. So the mask guidelines, you will remember that there were steps in your safety plan to prevent the transmission of COVID-19. And those key steps also apply to colds or the flu or other communicable diseases, which is the reason behind you as an operator developing that communicable disease plan, because we now realize washing your hands and staying home if you're not feeling well, for example, make an enormous difference on transition to keep yourself and others healthy. So the mask guidelines currently are only recommended. And they're recommended for indoor public settings for people 12 and older who are not yet fully vaccinated. Of course, we will never know when we're in a public setting if somebody is vaccinated or not. This is an honor system for us as British Columbians to determine what is our comfort level around wearing a mask or not. When you're fully vaccinated for 14 days after your second dose is when you have the maximum protection from that vaccine, and therefore masks are unnecessary. They're optional for children's age 2 to 12, and under 2-year-old children are not recommended to be wearing masks. There's a lot of conversation around proof of vaccination, and it's actually not able to be requested by providers, either by employees, employers, or by guests, as vaccination information is personal information. Some people may choose to continue to wear a mask after they're fully vaccinated, and that's okay. There are many people that are, as Arun identified, some are more cautious and some are less cautious about removing or wearing masks at this point. And we just need to be okay with some people are wearing them for different reasons and other people are not. Next slide, please, Carissa. Physical distancing. Again, this is one of the preventive measures that was very important at the beginning of the pandemic. Physical distancing is no longer needed due to the number of vaccinations within the population. Operationally, we had physical distancing markers, we had plexiglass barriers, occupancy restrictions, for example, in elevators. So we're now transitioning from a physical distancing, restriction to mindful social contact. And this really also is around the comfort level of people's personal space in indoor areas. And so the thoughtfulness around being mindful when you're within an indoor setting and whether or not you're wearing masks is going to be very important. It's self-directed or could be directed by a policy within an operation. So our provincial government has identified some key directives or some key messages for us called the Golden Rules for Everyday Life. And this is to support this transition from us being guided by very specific restrictions to a time when we need to really take stock of our own comfort level and other people's comfort level. Number one, our message is get vaccinated. And then respect people's personal space. We all have a different amount of personal space, and we certainly do need to respect that. Also, follow the guidelines and the recommendations and make sure that you're aware of what those are. Consider people's situations and comfort levels, again, not only for physical space, but also for mask wearing or for barriers. I know that many operations are looking at continuing to use those plexiglass barriers, and that's just fine. Other ones are completely ready to take them down and once again have an open air arrival or restaurant environment. If sick, stay home. This is critical, especially with now our ability for making sure that there is a degree of time, if you're not feeling well, that is supported by employees and employers alike. Wash your hands. I think we've learned a lot over the last 17, 18 months, and this is one of the most critical things, much more important than wearing a mask. Check before you travel. There will be some jurisdictions and areas that will be absolutely wide open and ready to welcome visitors from all over, and others are taking a little more cautious approach. So go to the DMO, to the local hotel, to the motel, and actually ask what is open, what is not open. You know, we're still in a time where many businesses are operating in reduced hours. So again, to make sure that you avoid disappointment, do your homework before you go. And of course, it's always safer outdoors. So the indoor spaces still have some guidelines, but that big wide open BC is open for all of us to enjoy. Now we are going to go through a couple of very specific operational things for you. Check in, check out. So this is really about arrival, the arrival communication and the experience. So it's important when you're looking at your website, your reservation messaging, the message on check-in at a property, that you're thinking about your operation and what is important to communicate to the arrival experience. We used to have very specific COVID messaging that no longer will be there. For example, the safety plans that Arun referred to earlier. You know, we had contactless check-in. We had, you know, a tub for a pen that was a dirty pen or a clean pen. You know, all of those kind of things as well need to be evaluated so that when somebody is checking in, whether or not you have stayover service or what is different than, you know, 2019, make sure that you really think about those operational pieces, because it is up to you to determine what your operational experience is going to be under these new guidelines. There is very few actual restrictions that remain in step 3, and there will be even less in step 4. So you can determine whether or not to continue each of the step 2 things based on your own company policy and the comfort of your team and what your operational experience is all about. For example, we can return to valet parking, bell services, and concierge, but all of these are at the operational discretion. And I will also say that throughout the province, we know that there is a very dire workforce shortage. And so the capacity to be able to provide these different experiences or services within different kinds of properties around the province could well be very limited due to the lack of the workforce availability. So it's up to you as an operator or a hotel owner to determine what you're able to provide and the value of that, and then also making sure that you're communicating that, which will set the guest up for the best experience possible. Public spaces, pools, and spas. So all of the pools, spas, and public spaces facilities will operate just like pre-pandemic. There is no restrictions around how many people within the public spaces or physical distancing. You can determine as a business which safety protocols are most appropriate for your operations. For example, some spas may determine to continue for their service providers or estheticians or whichever positions that they might have to wear masks. And other pools and spas will determine not to wear masks. That is completely up to you as the operator. But it is important for you to be able to communicate that to your guests so that they can understand what is available or what the experience will be. There are some pools that may still limit capacity, and they may still want to manage booking times for capacities for operational reasons. And that is completely fine as well. But communicating that to your guests is what is critical to make sure that that guest employee interaction and anticipated experience is understood prior to being faced with one with masks or one without. We understand that this is very challenging. We've come from a very prescriptive environment, and we're now moving into self-determining from an operational perspective environment. And we know that there are challenges this summer and into the fall until people continue to be more comfortable with the different restrictions that operations and hotels and motels determine. Gym times are still by booking. So you can still, when you're looking at going to the gym in the morning, generally speaking, we're seeing most arrival experience will say, would you like to use the gym? This is when it's open. And you can have people book in for specific times, or you cannot have that happen. And again, that is up to you as an operation. The next operational piece is food and beverage. So under the formal or former public order, liquor could only be served to patrons who were seated. This has been removed and service is now permitted. Bar service is now permitted. Guests, however, must be seated when consuming food and drink and or if they remain on the premises. So there are no limits to the number of people who can be seated together, but there still remains a restriction around table hopping. So you can have a table of 10 and you don't have to worry about writing down who's at the table or who the contact is any longer, but table hopping is not encouraged and certainly discouraged. So the contract tracing of who is at the table, again, you don't have to take names and phone numbers anymore. And for singing or karaoke on the premises, then any restrictions around that have been removed. So once again, you can go and sing and go to karaoke bars if that's what you'd like to do. There's no current rules or an order separating performers and patrons for 3 meters, where there used to have to be a barrier or a separation distance. That also has been removed. And the hours of liquor service have gone back to pre-pandemic hours. Hand washing facilities, alcohol-based sani must be available and easily within reach. Obviously, heightened cleanliness is going to be critical at every step of the hospitality and tourism industry within guest contact. Signage remains for patrons to wash their hands and encourage sanitation. High-touch services and utensils frequently cleaned and sanitized is continuing to be part of step 3. In housekeeping. In housekeeping, we have 2 buckets here, during the guest stay and after the guest stay. There is a suggestion to encourage employee comfort and safety around mask wearing and when they are comfortable to enter the room. We've had many questions around stayover service, and it is completely, again, up to the operator. And we are, in fact, finding, again, the workforce shortage will be limiting many areas and many properties to be able to provide that. Some are doing it on request only. Some are not doing stayover service at all for the summer of 2021, understandably due to the lack of employees to do that. But it is, in fact, not part of a restriction. It is completely up to the operator. The industry perception, so focus on after stay cleaning and disinfecting, is the single most common question that we're getting and the most calls that we're getting from guests and people traveling. So as a accommodation property, it is very important that you have heightened cleanliness within public view and that there is a confidence that that arrival experience and the fresh, clean nature of the room is obvious. And I think that will be going on for quite some time, given where we have been in the last 16 months. The number one focus, of course, as I referred to, is health and safety of the team and the guest. Increasing service needs to be operational decisions based on the available workforce. So after the guest stay, there's no wait time for housekeeping services. Follow the health and current guidelines for PPE, which is that it's up to you as an operator, and certainly use approved disinfectants. Now, outside events. You know, we've done quite a bit of work over the last few weeks with the Ministry of Health with the new orders. And the restrictions currently for outside events is no more than 5,000 people or 50% of the seated operating capacity of a place, excluding event staff, whichever number is greater. There is seating, if there is seating available for the participants. And participants are seated throughout the place in such a way as to use all the available space. Collecting contact information is no longer required. And if you're in an outdoor event, dancing is allowed, and tents with no side are considered outside. So you can have a, you know, a marquee without the walls up in case you need shade, or should you have inclement weather, and that still is an outside event. For indoor events, seating is available for each participant and is assigned to a seat or a table. And there is no more than 50 people or 50% of the seating capacity. So when we think about very large conference spaces or even medium-sized conference spaces where you could do, historically do a dinner for 150, then you can do 75 at the seated plan of the occupancy. So that's a fire regulation seating plan. Dance floors for indoor continue to be closed, and that I believe will be removed in step 4. For trade shows and flow through events, there is no capacity limitation. So that would be like a market or a trade show, but indoor seated events still have that restriction of 50% capacity or 50 persons. And now we'll go to our, submitted questions. Is moving away from the COVID-19 safety plan safe? You know, we have, again, all different degrees of risk capacity from people. You know, our Dr. Bonnie Henry, our Minister of Health, WorkSafe BC, and our national body, as well as our international bodies, have determined that moving into step 3 is safe. Workers are not at risk. We have high vaccination rates. We continue to encourage everybody to get the second vaccine. And the moving from a safety plan into a communicable disease plan is the responsible next thing to do. So yes, it is safe to move to step 3. And we have certainly, we have to be vigilant again about those key things like washing our hands and making sure that we stay home if we're not feeling well. Arun, do you have anything to add to that?
No, again, it's a reflection of what's in the environment, and there may be some adjustments to it going forward. But the way things are right now, I guess the focus is more on communicable diseases as a general approach rather than a specific COVID-19 approach. So this is a transitionary phase in many ways to step 4 when everything comes off. And I think under the circumstances, what is more important is probably reassuring your employees that this is something that's based on science and on the recommendation of the health authorities and the provincial health officer. So it's more a reassurance exercise than, you know, talking specifically about whether the changes are required or not. This is the determination made by made based on scientific evidence. So this is considered safe under these circumstances.
Thank you, Arun. Next question. Do employers need to pay for masks if they're still requiring them to wear, requiring employees to wear them? If an operation determines that employees are to wear masks, then yes, they must pay for them as the PPE as an operational determinant. We have many operations within the province now that are not wearing masks and many that are. And that will transition certainly over time. But if they are determined a part of operational attire, then yes, the business must pay. Are masks required at social or corporate events? They are recommended, but no longer mandatory. And of course, remember, if you are double vaccinated, again, has been determined from a science-based decision that you do not need to, but again, it is up to your public or your personal, well-being and how you're feeling about wearing a mask indoors or not. Employers require younger people to wear a mask until they're fully vaccinated. You cannot base mask wearing on vaccinations because it's private information. Employers cannot ask to know if a member of the staff has been vaccinated or not. Can people mingle at indoor trade shows, or does it follow similar to no mingling at bars and restaurants? Yes, trade shows fall under the flow through events. Mingling is fine. Are daily health checks required? What should we do to ensure staff are well? Employers need to have policies to help staff not come into the workplace when they're sick. Employers can make decisions based on their workplace and decide what is best. And some employers may choose to continue with the daily health checks or may use posters to remind employees about symptoms to look out and not come to work if they're sick. Having a sick policy is really important. And part of that, of your health and safety committee, of which I'm sure most of you or all of you have, but this is part of your new sort of, this is part of our culture going forward, to check in with people if they're not feeling well and make sure that you're encouraging them and acknowledging if they're not feeling well, that it's fine for them to stay at home and in fact encouraged. Can I require a worker to be vaccinated as a condition of employment? Whether an employee may require workers to be vaccinated will depend on the nature of the work in the workplace. As every workplace is different, employers should seek advice. And certainly we did have a webinar earlier last month that in detail went through this, but you need to seek advice as an employer if and when you're considering mandatory vaccination policy. There needs to be a balance between the workplace health and safety, privacy, labor, and employment issues. How can employers prepare for conflict? Arun, I know that you've held a couple of webinars on conflict resolution, and so I would welcome you to answer this.
Thanks, Ingrid. Yes, as I mentioned earlier on too, because we are at a time when there's been major shift in terms of how we are approaching this pandemic, a major shift in terms of the restrictions itself, confusion amongst lots of folks about what they should or should not do, not very clear, no restrictive requirements anymore, more guidelines, which is often not clear to many employers or businesses or customers. So all of these produces a perfect storm almost in terms of the opportunity for conflict. So recognizing that as the first piece. So my recommendation here for employers would be to make sure that your policies, whether you choose to retain some of your restrictions or not, whether you're asking for more than what the provincial requirements or not, either which way, you have the ability to be able to choose what you want to do in your workplace, but you need to make sure that everybody understands what those requirements are. So if you're insisting that they need certain people need to wear masks, then that's part of your policies, your internal policies, just like any of your other policies in terms of attendance, for instance, and you have the right to enforce those. But there needs to be clarity and there needs to be consistency in the way it is enforced, because the moment there's a lack of consistency in enforcement, that's when conflict starts arising. Also recognizing that a lot of your frontline workers are probably folks who may or may not have significant experience in the field. Their ability to be able to handle conflicting situations may not be significant, so they need to be supported by your supervisors or managers or owners to make sure that there is someone there to backstop them if they're encountering a situation like this. So the challenges revolve around how you approach these things, and not as much as necessarily your policies or what you're actually trying to do. It is about how you manage the situation And communication over everything else trumps what can help you deal with this better.
Thank
And
you,
sorry,
Arun.
Ingrid, and the link there has some scripts. So this may be something that you can actually share with your employees in terms of what they can use, the kind of language they can use when they're confronted by customers with positions that may not be in line with what you have in place. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you, Arun. I was going to say, the scripts and making sure as an employer that you're going through to ensure that there's confidence with employees of how to address. Because again, some people are very nervous. Some people are, ready to throw their arms open to the wind and get on just as though this has never been part of our reality this last year. And they're the frontline people that at the end of the day, we need to support so that they have the tools. And the scripts and the link within this slide will be shared. And we really encourage you, should you have specific questions, to reach out, but to use these tools that have been developed for you to ensure that we're supporting your teams. Now we'll go to the open forum, and I see we have a few questions here, which I'll answer. Jesse, is there a distance between table needed recommended in restaurants? No, there is no. You can go back to your original seating plan within the restaurant. What about breakfast buffets? So I'm thinking, Pradeep, you may be asking, are breakfast buffets okay? Yes, buffets are okay. I'm thinking this is banquet, no doubt, or a breakfast buffet in a restaurant. Yes, you can once again have a breakfast buffet, but you do need to have a hand sanitizer station that would be there to ensure that people can sanitize before and after using the buffet. And we're seeing that quite a few restaurants actually, although you don't have to have somebody serving the food, you do want to make sure that it is a clean, organized buffet. And many restaurants and hotels are in fact having somebody there to ensure that they're managing the flow and the cleanliness of the buffet. VJ, I'm seeing has asked a question. Is flow through events the same as stand-up receptions? Now, a flow through event is correct. This is a stand-up reception. They are considered one and the same. And another question, can hotels accommodate stand-up cocktails, which includes mingling? Yes, that is a stand-up reception. Does this also mean that hotels can pass canapes during a reception? Correct. Can guest goes up to the bar and get a beverage leisurely? Yes. Bar service is open in hotels, restaurants, and bars and receptions. So you can once again have the bar in your pre-crush or crush area for a reception before dinner, for example. And then we have another question, a hotel patio. Can we do stand-up receptions with people mingling? Yes, again, you are able to do stand-up receptions outside with people mingling. Is there still a need for contract tracing for campgrounds? No, you do not need to do campground or contract tracing for campgrounds, Sarah. But you will have a reservation system. And so when people are making reservations, of course, you do have their contact information, but contract tracing is no longer required. And Anna, are sneeze guards mandatory for buffets? If not, are masks required? Sneeze guards have been mandatory for buffets, as far as I know, for a very long time. Kelsey, I'm just going to ask to make a note here because there is not a sneeze guards currently. But I do want to just note, as myself having had buffets for many years, sneeze guards were something that were introduced many years ago. And Arun, if you have any comment regarding that, I'd welcome your input.
No, Ingrid, I don't have anything specific about sneeze guards, but I can check for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. We will follow up with that one. Arun has now shared the resources for the communicable disease prevention plan for you. I'm just looking if there's any more questions here. Certainly, I think, you know, all of these different restrictions that were so binding to the way that we operated, the intention here is for you as owners, operators, managers to get back to a sense of normalcy due to the high vaccination rates, and making sure that we still, though, continue to provide a level of cleanliness and care, which will ensure that we're looking after ourselves, our families, and our employees and our guests. And so as we're doing that, these restrictions and as questions come up, will continue to evolve. Can the industry, I'm only seeing part of your question, JJ. Maybe you could repost that. And I certainly would recommend that not only the toolkit, but the resources on both the WorkSafe BC site and the go2HR site and the BCHA site are absolutely there to ensure that you have the information you need to operate safely and confidently. And what we are hearing is many people's employees, as they are coming back to work or they're new employees, that you know, that you're able to provide a degree of confidence and care in this current situation. And as this moves forward to complete reopening, it'll mean that their confidence will grow, guest confidence will grow, and so will your ability to operate on a maximum capacity. JJ, I see, can the various associations come together to push non-skilled LMI to be allowed to work? You know, JJ, thank you for that question. Certainly workforce, you know, we're hearing from our sector in entirety, that would be tourism and hospitality, that the workforce and lack thereof is our single biggest issue following liquidity. There's a lot of concern around liquidity getting us to April of 2022, when once again, we hope the world will be open and we once again welcoming them to British Columbia. We do have a strategic group of associations working on the access to foreign workers with all the different streams that historically that we could have garnered to support the workforce and also to support all of you as operations. So thank you for that question. And I can tell you we are fully engaged in that and have had several meetings over the past weeks. And again, we'll continue to do this work and have a submission that we're submitting for our Minister of Jobs and our Tourism Ministry as well. Just seeing we have another question. Can a wedding have a standing cocktail reception before their seated dinner? There are guidelines for indoor and outdoor events, and a wedding is certainly considered an event. So you can have a stand-up cocktail reception at an indoor event that is considered an event like a trade show, and mingling is allowed, and it has to be seated with those seating capacities for the dinner portion of the wedding. If the wedding is outside, then you have a different capacity number, which would be a maximum of 5,000. And again, you can have a stand-up cocktail reception outdoors. And we have a question. Thank you for this, Vijay. Just to confirm, dancing at weddings indoors is still not permitted. That is correct. Indoor dancing is not permitted. Outdoor dancing is permitted. So that continues to be a restriction for step 3. Really great questions. Thank you, everybody, for making use of the Q&A function. I'm seeing that we have 10 minutes left. I'll just give a moment in case anybody has any, final questions they'd like to ask. And Arun, why don't I ask you, do you have any final comments that you'd like to provide?
Sure, thanks, Ingrid. Firstly, I just want to appreciate all the efforts of BCHA and all that you've done over the last year. You and your team have been really, doing a lot to ensure that the industry remains viable through this period and successful at the other side of it. So we really appreciate working with you as go2HR, and from all of us, want to thank you for your leadership. You know, webinars like these help bring out some of the key elements around health and safety back into focus. And I think this is probably a reminder for all of us that health and safety plays a very significant and primary role in employment for people around, in pretty much any industry, but especially for us as hospitality folks. People to people contact is something that we value so much. And the last year has been really difficult when we were asked to stay away. So ensuring that we can do anything that we can to make sure that our employees are safe, we have a strong health and safety program in place, to build on. If things change or if the environment changes, we are in a position that's much stronger than we were in the past, that we're able to deal with some of these changes. So anything related to that, we'd be happy to support employers. We are the Health and Safety Association for the industry, and we'd be happy to help with the Hotel Association, but also any employers who may have specific questions at any point post the webinar. So we'd be happy to address it. So that's it, Ingrid.
Thank you so much. I'm just looking, I think we have a couple of more questions here. We have another moment in order to answer it. To confirm the verbiage scripts you mentioned, will this be emailed out or available on the BCHA website? Stacy, yes, this webinar will be created in our communique and will also rest on our website. And Marilyn, you were my coach every step. We made it. Thanks to you. Oh, that is so kind. Thank you for that kind comment. I've never gotten through 2020 if it wasn't for your leadership at BCHA. That's very kind of you. Thank you so much. Being a hotelier for many, many years, it was very evident very early on that we needed to provide the information that we could to support the industry. It's been a really tough slog, I think, for the industry overall, and the compassion that we feel for you operators. We really, with our partners in Taya BC and Arun and Krista and their team at go2HR, and the ability for us to reach out to the ministry and confirm restrictions and reasons and understanding, we've all been in it together. And I really thank you for your kind words. It's very, very kind. We've certainly done our best, and it's certainly not all about me. My team, Kelsey, Carissa, Sam, Mike at the BCHA, we've just, and my board of directors, which gives us this insight from all the different areas around the province, and are very available and open to support our work. So thank you for your words. Okay, I have another question. If there is a bar inside the ballroom, can guests go to the bar during dinner and grab a drink? Okay, Vijay, you're asking me all the questions that I'm hoping I have the answer for. Yes, you can go to the bar to get a drink. But if you are inside in the ballroom, you are not allowed table hopping. But you can get up, go to the bar, because that is called bar service. It is similar to a reception. You can have bar service. It doesn't have to be table service. But people still need to be allocated seats, and those are the seats they need to stay for the dinner. They're not allowed to stand up and hop around. So seeing that we are nearing the end of our webinar, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to share this last hour with Arun and myself and our team. We've done our best to ensure that we're addressing the questions that we're receiving from you. But I will tell you that I know more questions are going to come up. Every day it is a different landscape, and somebody asks a question that we haven't addressed. We do our best to include the answers to specific questions within our communique, and that goes out twice a week. And I know with Go2 as well, and our work that we do very closely with WorkSafe BC. As we transition towards step 4, we will no doubt see more operational queries and do our best to ensure that we communicate the answers to those as quickly as possible. So reach out as you have been doing. We're here for you, and we'll do everything to support you between now and next spring, when hopefully we can all be back to normal. Arun, any last part?
No, thank you, Ingrid. Very well said. And just one last personal piece. I started my career many years ago. My first job was in a hotel, and I've worked at pretty much every department of the hotel. Seeing the industry go through this in the last year has been particularly painful and very personal for me. So I'm really happy to see this restart, and I really want to wish all of you the very best. And we're happy to support in any which way that we can. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I know that we have hotels, motels, lodges, inns, bed and breakfasts. One thing that has happened over the last year and a half is that our entire accommodation industry that is intimately tied with tourism has come together. And all this work that we do for all of you. And it is relevant regardless of size, capacity, or makeup of your fixed roof accommodation. So we'll continue to do our best to provide leadership and address the issues for the industry. No doubt we will, in step 4, do something very similar to follow up to make sure that we can answer all your questions. So thank you again for joining us. Stay well, be safe, and I really hope that you have a safe and happy summer.